So, hello Ellie, good to have you here today. As you know, we're meeting today because we're putting together a half an hour short training session for a number of different healthcare professionals, activity workers, occupational therapists, all from CAMS, and this is going to give them a snapshot into the importance of physical activity and why, as healthcare professionals, that we need to focus on physical activity and inactivity within our work. And we just know how important it is to include lived experience and hear from your perspective as somebody with lived experience, which we'll ask you to share in a bit. But also, you've worked in health services, haven't you, for quite a number of years now, so wearing a number of different hats, and so it would be just brilliant if you could just give us your take on the importance of physical activity, first by just sharing who you are. Ellie Wildbore.
Ellie Wildbore. Yeah, so I am 35. I've had mental health problems since my teenage years, so probably went back further than that. So it's been something that's like been around all my life. I've got quite complex issues, including an eating disorder, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I've spent a lot of time in hospitals. I've spent a lot of time very unwell and doing various things to my body that meant I wasn't able to move about. Yeah, it's been a major part of my life. I'm also now someone that works in the NHS in mental health services, and I'm also someone for whom physical activity is a massive part of my day-to-day life, and has been and still is a massive part of my recovery.
So tell us a little bit about why physical activity is important to you and what type of physical activity that you've been involved with.
Yeah, so I don't know, I've had quite a complicated relationship with physical activity. I was pushed into ballet when I was little by my mum, and I was also swam competitively until my mid-teens. So I was very much forced into it as a child, but I remember hating PE and the whole being picked last thing, all of that. So I had quite a difficult connotations with it. And then also having an eating disorder has made it more complicated. Obviously, overactivity can be a problem for people with eating disorders. And I never really found the thing that made me tick, that I was doing for me and for enjoyment. The only reason I'd be doing things was because I wanted to lose weight, because eating disorder related things. And so it wasn't actually until about 2017 I was in a long-term psychiatric admission for my other mental health problems, and I discovered roller skating, and that over time became something that was a really massive part of me moving forward in my recovery. Though I'd done other things that I'd quite enjoyed beforehand, so I did do some circus things. I was a hoop dancer and things like that. This was something that really needed to use like all of my body, and my body needed to be well. It needed to be like well nourished. It needed to be not cut open, and like quite often my self-harm was so severe, quite often I'd be on crutches, so like if I wanted to skate I couldn't be doing that sort of thing, and so it became a really big part of like motivation to start looking after myself. It gave me a whole new social scene. Beforehand my life had been only really people that I was meeting in hospital and psychiatric services somehow, whereas like all of a sudden there's a whole new set of people to be friends with. I was pushing my body to the limits, but in a healthy sort of way. I realised in that admission actually that I needed a sense of risk in my life, and I was getting that through unhealthy means, putting myself in a lot of dangerous situations. But skating gave me a kind of more socially acceptable way of having a bit of risk in my life. So I would skate in skate parks mainly, and that is obviously throwing myself off very big ramps on tiny wheels is not necessarily the safest thing, but it's really helped me like channel some of my inner stuff that's going on, and it's also like it's just every time I go to the skate park I learn a new thing, and it's led to other hobbies. Other like physical activities now a massive part of my life. I cycle everywhere, it's a huge part of my recovery, and when I'm not able to access those for some reason, it really does have a detrimental effect. So I've had a period of time recently where I've been really physically unwell and not being able to exercise, and my mental health really struggles, so it's been a massive thing for my mental health and my physical.
How would you say, you know, there are times when you're particularly poorly? Obviously now you're motivated by roller skating and want to get back there, so it can, that kind of journey getting back there I can see being quite healthy, but it must be really difficult being quite poorly, and you just said I'm not able to exercise. What's that like, and have you got any advice for others around the difficulties of that and how people can manage that when that must feel quite intense for you?
Yeah, because I think it is for me that now where I am at in my recovery, and knowing how much of a positive impact physical activity has on my mental health, and that's taken a number of years to like get to that place, but I therefore place a lot of emphasis on being able to do it, and so it was really scary when I was told I couldn't do physical activity, because I was like, I don't know how I cope now, or do I end up going back to those old coping mechanisms that I had? It was really, really difficult, and you know, things weren't great. I did struggle, but also actually I did learn that I can take time away from it, and it's here when I get back. I'm building up my fitness again, and that actually was quite, sounds weird, but it actually was quite useful to know that not everything in my mental health recovery is entirely down to physical activity, because I think I'd placed a lot of emphasis on it. So knowing you can take a break, I think, is really important, especially for people who maybe struggle with overactivity. Yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, I was just thinking that yeah, I know you have spent quite a bit of time with you, and I know how educated you are from yourself and from others in terms of your relationship with your health, your well-being and physical activity, and but I guess other people might be at the start of their experience and relationship with physical activity. And what would you say to a healthcare professional wanting to have healthy conversations around physical activity, bearing in mind there's going to be people on one end of the spectrum that haven't thought too much about physical activity and desperately want to exercise but can't, and but then you've also got other people that are more towards your end of the spectrum that have got a good relationship with physical activity when you're well. I mean, how would you want people to talk to you about physical activity? Because surely it's not just black and white.
I think keeping it present, keeping it part of conversations. Like when I've been in inpatient wards, quite often it's just something that's not really mentioned, and actually something that's very restricted, because you might not be allowed to go in the garden that day because there's not enough staff, or you're not allowed out on leave. Or I've been, when I was sectioned once, I can remember trying to do some like yoga sort of stuff in the corridor, and I got told off because it was like inappropriate, and it was a health and safety thing. So it became some sort of thing that, like, when I was in that environment, it was like not really okay to do unless you went to the organised gym session at X time on a Thursday. So I think like keeping those conversations open, and like being aware that physical activity is different, and what works for people is different for everyone. It also doesn't mean doing sports. It could mean, like, you know, it could mean walking, it could mean doing a bit of gardening, it can mean all sorts. It doesn't mean you have to go and like hammer it at the gym, or you have to be going running, or you have to join this football team. It's very much what you need it to be. I'm very fortunate that when I was in the hospital that I was in, where I discovered roller skating, initially they were quite anxious, because it was a kind of hospital with people from all over the country who had been sort of like given up on, I guess. We were some of like the worst of the worst, and the initial thing when we got roller skates and started roller skating around the hall was like, oh my god, this is health and safety, there's too much risk, this, that and the other. But actually they gave us the benefit of the doubt, and they noticed that our risk, we all engaged in risky behaviours if left to our own devices, but with the addition of doing roller skating, we also got into some other like acro and things like that, our risk actually decreased. And so I think there's something as well about not some positive risk taking around it as well.
Yeah, definitely. You know, there's often advice for adults, children, disabled people about a specific amount of activity or strength and balance exercises that you should do. And what would you say about set advice for groups of people? Is that a helpful thing or not?
I think, to be honest, and this is my own opinion, this is no official opinion, but I think, to be honest, that sort of statutory government guidelines doesn't generally suit the mental health population, like particularly if you're talking about people who are inpatient, for a variety of reasons. One, that it might just be not viable that we can do 150 minutes of whatever, or it might be that people have got eating disorders, and that's actually a really unhelpful number because it becomes like a minimum you must do above that, and it can cause problems. So I think having like really rigid guidelines isn't particularly helpful for this population. I think it's much more about what makes you feel good, what works for you, what brings you joy and a feeling of satisfaction and like I'm achieving something.
Yeah.
That's really important, and that might be for some people, particularly people who maybe have been on antipsychotics for a long time and maybe are having physical health problems because of that. Like, it may be that it's getting off the bus at a stop earlier than you would do normally and walking the next bit, and that's enough at the beginning. Like, everything starts slowly. You don't have to be running marathons like within a week. It's taking things at your own pace. So I wouldn't really say that the guidelines are necessarily that helpful, but just that sort of like general aim to just be more active and less sedentary is the goal.
I think you've mentioned a few things over the last sort of 5 minutes and emphasised really the importance of a personalised approach and a graded approach, and which wouldn't be particularly new to healthcare professionals. This is something that we would think about all the time, but I guess where it might be new is applying physical activity in there as well. Actually, physical activity alongside so many other interventions are complex. It's complex in its own right, and actually needs that individualised, personalised way of managing it and ensuring that people have the time to talk through them complexities and making sure that door is open.
Yeah, like for example, I've mentioned before, like when I've been on a ward and the only option really has been to go to the gym session. For me, I know because of my eating disorder that going to the gym is a really negative thing for me. It becomes just about burning as many calories as I can, and like it's not a positive thing. And if that's the only option that I've got, and I'm like pigeonholed down that without any sort of opportunity to talk about actually what do I need to get from doing physical activity, like generally what I don't need to get burning calories from my physical activity. I need to get that sense of like well-being and things like that. So like having those conversations with people are really, really important, and one size does not fit all in most contexts, but especially in this one.
And I keeps on coming back round to my head with everything that you're saying, is that the importance of social capital. And it sounds like you've described through your love of roller skating that you were able to build up that social network, and actually that social network has continued to be a really important part of your recovery.
Yeah, massively. I think for me it's the other stuff that's come with the physical activity that's actually been the thing that's perpetuated recovery, if that makes sense. Like, I now have a huge group of friends that are nothing to do with my mental health stuff. They understand my mental health stuff on a large part, and that's really helpful. But that's sort of that's something that's made me feel like I belong in society, which I often haven't felt as someone who's just been locked up repeatedly or moved around against my will. I really found the place I belong. Like the skate park that I go to, like I'll just go and hang out there sometimes and not even put my skates on. And they've said to me, the guys who own it are like, oh, you belong here, you're part of the furniture, and that in itself is a massive thing that I've not always had in my life.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes some of the most important parts of the recovery aspect of physical activity isn't actually just going out and getting active. It's all the other stuff that comes with it.
Would you say that skating is unique for that sort of thing, or do you think climbing, running, biking, do you think there's potential for lots of different sports to provide somebody with that sense of belonging? And
yeah, I think so. I think a lot of people who do sports are looking for a sense of belonging as well. And I think the sports that maybe aren't necessarily a team sport, where you're going to let your team down if you're not having a good day, are probably more helpful for people, like things like climbing and like circus skills, or like thinking outside the box sometimes. Like I'm not a runner, but I know a lot of people get a lot of joy out of that, and that's great. But sometimes thinking outside the box about what those physical activities are. But I think you find those communities everywhere, and yes, they're all going to be slightly unique, but I don't think skating is unique in having that community. I know, for example, the circus community is similar. Yeah, and I've got other friends who've made good friends and social connections through running groups and things. So
brilliant. So just to finalise, have you got any kind of personal advice or hints or tips or anything that you're speaking to a whole bunch of healthcare professionals, and anything that you would like to say as their peer, but also as somebody with lived experience of being a service user?
Yeah, I think there's just, physical activity is everybody's business. It's not just the activity coordinator or the physio or whoever it is. It's not, or fitness instructors. It is everybody's business. Like, and that can look really. It can look really minor. It could be as much as like you're a psychiatrist, and instead of sitting in your psychiatrist's office consulting with someone, you walk around the park while you're doing that. Like it can be everybody's business. You don't have to be an expert to talk about it. And like, yeah, that just understanding what makes people tick and why they might be doing this is massively key.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ellie.
No problem.